If there's one moment I'll never forget, it's the exact second my bull Diesel plowed through Karen's perfectly curated tulip garden like a snorting lawnmower on steroids, while she screamed from atop a birdbath holding a salad bowl like a gladiator's shield. But let's rewind 10 hours. Because this whole mess started when someone who had no business touching my land decided to cut a very specific wire. A wire that, unknown to her, didn't just keep a fence electrified, it also controlled the only thing standing between 2,000 pounds of raging Angus muscle and the freshly mulched hedges of our over-regulated suburban utopia. My ranch is just outside the border of a newly expanded HOA zone. For decades, I'd lived peacefully with my cattle, chickens, and one very intelligent, very territorial bull named Diesel. He had his pasture, I had my electric fence, and the rest of the world minded their business. That all changed when the HOA decided to stretch their jurisdiction like a rubber band around our side of the neighborhood, annexing land they had no historical claim to and trying to impose their pastel-painted, policy-packed nonsense onto folks who didn't give a hoot about grass blade height or mailbox font uniformity. I wasn't technically under their rules, but that didn't stop Karen, the newly minted president of the HOA, from treating every property within binocular range like her personal chessboard. Karen wasn't just your average HOA president, she was a hurricane of micromanagement in yoga pants. She had opinions on everything. The color of my barn, the height of my haystack, even the scent of my compost pile. But her latest crusade was the electric fence. She claimed it was threatening to the community aesthetic and unnecessarily aggressive in tone. I told her that if she could convince Diesel to stay put without it, I'd hand her the wire clippers myself. She responded by threatening to take legal action, citing a vague boundary violation from a zoning map printed before the moon landing. I figured it was all bark and no bite. Karen was loud, annoying, but mostly harmless, until she wasn't. One afternoon, while I was working a few towns over on a feed delivery contract, I got a call from my motion sensor system that the fence had gone offline. At first, I thought it was a power blip, but then I saw the backup kick in, and the gate logs showed something terrifying. The bull gate had opened automatically, which meant the fence current had been severed. Diesel didn't miss those cues. He was trained. If the fence turned off, he knew it meant one thing: freedom. I jumped in my truck and tore down the road, the image of Diesel stomping through suburbia already burned into my brain. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined, was that the whole fiasco was already going viral. By the time I reached the neighborhood, a dozen different residents had posted clips of Diesel prancing like a rodeo champ across perfectly paved sidewalks, sending poodles scampering and hedge fences crumbling. Karen's own backyard camera captured her trying to confront him with nothing but a pool noodle and a fanny pack, shrieking something about livestock ordinances before locking herself in a garden shed when Diesel pawed the turf a little too enthusiastically. As I got closer to home, I saw the damage unfold live. My phone pinged with an alert from my other camera feeds. Karen was caught on video, not just near the fence, but with a pair of actual, honest-to-God wire cutters in hand. She'd brought a landscaping guy with her, clearly some poor soul who thought he was trimming hedges. But instead, she marched him over to the side of my property and ordered him to snip the ugly wire. The second the wire was cut, the system logged a drop in current, and the auto-release on the bull gate triggered. Clean. Perfect. Documented. I pulled up just in time to see a group of HOA board members trying to corral Diesel with nothing but patio furniture and hope. It was like watching amateur matadors in a suburban coliseum. One guy actually threw a yoga mat at him. Another lady tried to bribe him with kale chip. Diesel just blinked, unimpressed, and proceeded to knock over a wrought iron bench like it was a toothpick. Meanwhile, Karen had finally emerged from her garden shed, covered in potting soil and breathing like she'd sprinted a marathon. She started screaming at me the second I stepped out of my truck, waving her phone and yelling something about trespassing bulls and public endangerment. I didn't even argue. I walked past her, pulled my Bluetooth override device from the truck, and tapped into Diesel's collar. It emitted a high-frequency chime he was conditioned to respond to. His ears perked. He turned. And then, like the world's most obedient wrecking ball, he trotted back toward me, tail flicking like he hadn't just reduced an entire gated community's landscaping to confetti. I patted his side, gave him a beef pellet from my pocket, and led him home while the crowd of traumatized HOA residents gawked. Karen, red-faced and fuming, tried to salvage the moment by declaring that she had saved the neighborhood from a dangerous animal. But then someone shouted from the crowd, "You let him out, Karen! There's a whole video of it!" Phones were raised. People were already screen recording. Karen's face went from rage to realization in a split second. She tried to pivot, blaming the landscaper. The landscaper, in turn, pointed straight at her and declared, "She told me to cut it." I didn't even need to say a word. That night, as I reset the fence, patched the cut line, and double-checked the security feed, I realized just how close we'd come to real disaster. Diesel could have hurt someone. He didn't, but that wasn't thanks to the HOA. It was luck and training. And Karen? She had no idea that what she'd cut wasn't just a wire. It was the trigger mechanism to a bull's gate, wired into a system approved by agricultural safety boards and reinforced after years of livestock behavior studies. And now? Well, now the entire HOA board had a front-row seat to what rural consequences looked like when city rules meet cattle logic. And trust me, we were just getting started. The morning after Diesel's unexpected suburban rampage, the neighborhood was eerily quiet, like a town that had just barely survived a tornado, except this one had hooves and a grudge against manicured grass. I sipped my coffee on the porch, watching news clips of the chaos play on local morning shows. One drone shot showed Diesel stomping down Azalea Lane with the grace of a freight train, another showed Karen trying to hide behind a recycling bin while clutching a broken clipboard like it might shield her from destiny. The best clip by far was the one someone had posted with dramatic music over it, calling Diesel the HOA Avenger. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or worry. Diesel had become a legend overnight. Word spread fast. Reporters were calling, neighbors were whispering, and HOA board members were frantically trying to figure out how to spin the whole mess. But Karen? She wasn't taking it lying down. Nope, she doubled down. By noon, she had already printed flyers declaring my property a hazard to public safety, and began passing them out door to door while wearing a wide-brimmed sun hat and oversized sunglasses, like a discount vigilante. What she didn't realize was that Diesel had slept through the entire morning, curled up like a giant dog in the shade of the barn, utterly unaware of the controversy swirling around him. By early afternoon, Karen was back at it, this time waving a self-printed, emergency HOA directive at anyone who would listen. She gathered a group of her loyal followers, mostly folks who'd moved in recently and didn't know any better, and marched toward my property, presumably to confront me or deliver some kind of ultimatum. I saw them coming from a mile away. Literally. Binoculars are handy out here. I had half a mind to let Diesel out again just to watch the drama unfold, but I figured once was enough, for now. Instead, I sat on my porch with a bowl of popcorn and waited. As soon as Karen reached the fence, she started shouting demands. Remove the electric wiring, build a neighbor-approved wooden fence, submit architectural drawings for all future agricultural modifications. I didn't say a word. I just pointed to the freshly welded steel sign bolted to the gate that read, "Private ranch property, not under HOA jurisdiction, trespassers will meet Diesel." That should have ended it. But Karen, never one to back down from making things worse, crossed the line. Literally. She slipped through the side path, stepped right onto my property, and started filming. She gave a full speech to her phone camera, blaming me for the previous day's disaster, claiming she'd been bullied by livestock, and accusing me of harboring a weaponized animal. She hadn't seen Diesel yet, though. He'd been quietly watching from the far end of the field, tail flicking, just waiting. When she called him an oversized lawnmower with horns, he decided he'd heard enough. Diesel began his trot toward the fence, not charging, not angry, just a slow, steady saunter. Karen didn't notice at first. She was too busy dramatically gesturing to her phone about community values and neighborhood unity. But then she heard the rhythmic thump of hooves, turned around, and froze. Diesel stared at her like she was a walking hay bale. She panicked. She shrieked. And then, in a move that defied physics and common sense, she tried to climb onto my ornamental wooden wagon wheel leaned against the barn wall. It promptly tipped over. She rolled off and landed in a wheelbarrow full of compost, legs flailing like a crab flipped on its back. Her followers? They were no help. One guy just kept filming. Another woman actually laughed before remembering she was supposed to be supporting Karen and turned it into a fake gasp. Diesel stopped 2 feet short of Karen, snorted once, and walked away like the drama queen he secretly is. Karen sat there in the wheelbarrow, covered in garden scraps, trying to regain her dignity while shouting that she was conducting a safety inspection. I didn't even get up. I just called out, "Next time, try an appointment." Later that day, I got a call from Animal Control. I figured they were going to lecture me, but instead, the guy on the other end chuckled and said, "Is Diesel available for birthday parties?" Turns out they'd received dozens of calls, but not about complaints. They were flooded with requests to meet Diesel, or bring him to events, or film a follow-up video. One woman even offered to paint his portrait. I told them Diesel wasn't a celebrity. He was a bull with a short fuse and a love for alfalfa. Still, the internet had other plans. Meanwhile, Karen tried to regroup. She called for an emergency HOA meeting at the community clubhouse. I went too. Figured it'd be good entertainment. The room was packed, half with angry residents who wanted answers, and half with curious locals who just wanted to see if Karen would implode again. She walked in dressed like a martyr going to trial, holding a stack of complaints, most of which she had clearly written herself. Her voice trembled as she accused me of domestic terrorism, agricultural negligence, and inappropriate rural conduct within visual proximity of urban households. But the moment she started playing a heavily edited video of Diesel from the previous day, someone shouted, "That's not even the real video, play the TikTok one." And suddenly, 3 people had already airdropped the original footage onto the meeting's screen. There she was, clear as day, ordering the worker to cut the fence. There Diesel was, walking peacefully until startled by a garden gnome. There she was, locking herself inside a plastic storage bin. The room erupted. Laughter, groans, a few slow claps. Karen turned redder than a tomato at a 4th of July picnic. She tried to argue the footage was deepfake manipulation, but the worker who'd helped her, my cousin, secretly wearing a mic, stood up in the back and said, "Yeah, no." She paid me cash and said the fence was just decorative. The room fell silent. Then the head of the HOA board cleared his throat and asked Karen to step outside while the rest of the board conferred. 10 minutes later, she returned only to be told she was being suspended from all HOA duties pending investigation. She stormed out in a fury, muttering about lawsuits and conspiracies. As I walked back to my truck, Diesel still chewing grass behind the gate, a few neighbors approached and shook my hand. "Didn't know you were dealing with all that," one said. "That bull of yours may have saved the neighborhood," said another. I chuckled and nodded. Diesel snorted again, this time loud enough for the whole street to hear. It was his way of saying, "Yeah, I know." And just like that, the myth of Diesel the Destroyer grew even larger. And Karen? She had no idea what storm was still coming. By the time the dust had settled from the emergency HOA meeting, Karen's reputation was in tatters, Diesel was a local folk hero, and I found myself getting free drinks at the feed store from folks who'd seen the footage. But just because Karen had been suspended didn't mean she was done causing trouble. No, she came back harder, meaner, and more obsessed with spinning the whole situation like she was the victim of a countryside conspiracy. Her latest trick? She tried to file a formal complaint with the county zoning board claiming my ranch violated residential zoning codes, despite the fact that my land had been zoned for agriculture since her parents were in diapers. I got the call a few days later. A county official, polite but clearly annoyed, asked if I could come in for a review of an escalating number of complaints from my neighbor. I knew exactly who it was. I didn't argue. I just gathered all my paperwork: deeds, permits, agricultural exemptions, livestock licensing, and most importantly, the installation contract for the electric fencing system signed off by both the State Agriculture Board and a federal livestock safety agency. My bull gate setup wasn't just legal. It had been used as a demonstration model at a regional rancher expo 2 years ago. When I walked into the county office, the official took one look at the binder I dropped on the table and sighed. "You know," he said, "this is the 3rd time this month we've gotten a call from that woman." He skimmed through the paperwork, saw the official zoning maps, then stopped at the footage I had printed out from the fence-cutting incident. "Is this her actually cutting your fence?" he asked. I nodded. "With a bolt cutter?" He leaned back in his chair, gave a long whistle, and said, "Well, that explains a lot. Turns out Karen hadn't just reported me. She'd sent in doctored photos of Diesel with exaggerated red eyes and stretched proportions, trying to make him look like a monster bull straight out of a horror movie. The official showed me one. Diesel's head had been badly photoshopped to look like it took up half his body. I couldn't help it, I burst out laughing. "That's not even the right breed," I said. "That's a cartoon bull from a video game." The complaint was dropped on the spot, but the official said something that made my ears perk. She mentioned she might be consulting a lawyer. "If she tries to claim you're liable for damages, you're going to want more than a defense. You'll want a counteroffensive." That's when the idea hit me. I'd been playing defense since this whole mess started. Maybe it was time to go on offense. Back home, I reached out to my cousin, the same one Karen had hired to cut the fence. He'd been wearing a hidden mic the whole time, and he still had the full audio clip saved. On it, Karen could be clearly heard saying, "Just cut it. He'll never know. That fence is just for show." I also had the digital logs from my electric gate system showing the exact moment of the wire cut and the gate release. I backed everything up on a thumb drive and sent it to my lawyer. Not to sue yet, but to have ready if Karen decided to push her luck again. That same week, a city insurance adjuster came to my property to assess damages related to the fence incident. Karen, in a stunning display of delusion, had filed a damage claim on behalf of the HOA for emotional trauma and landscape ruin caused by an escaped animal. When the adjuster showed up, I handed him a coffee, the binder, and a seat with a view of the fence and the pasture beyond it. Diesel, like clockwork, came trotting up to the gate, sniffed the air, and mooed politely. The adjuster smiled. "So this is the monster I've been hearing about?" I nodded. Diesel, as if on cue, wagged his tail and flopped onto the ground like a 2,000-pound puppy. The adjuster laughed. "He's got better manners than most people I know." We walked the property, and I showed him the cut fence, the logs, and the reinforced gate. He took photos, asked a few questions, and by the end of it said, "Well, from what I see, you're owed damages, not the other way around." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. I wasn't just clearing my name, I was stacking evidence. The pieces were all falling into place, and Karen was walking into a trap of her own making, step by oblivious step. But it wasn't until the HOA board convened again to vote on whether Karen's suspension would become a permanent removal that the biggest twist landed. Karen, in a last-ditch attempt to salvage her position, brought in a so-called expert to testify about the dangers of livestock fencing in residential adjacent areas. The expert, a man named Brent, arrived in a rented suit, carrying a laptop and wearing shoes so clean they practically glowed. He introduced himself as a private rural infrastructure consultant. 5 minutes into his presentation, I realized he'd never set foot on a working farm in his life. He showed slides with outdated data, cited laws that didn't exist, and called bulls livestock variants, like he was reading off a video game wiki page. But the moment he tried to claim that electric fencing systems are inherently unstable and prone to accidental discharges, I stood up and handed a flash drive to the board president. This contains footage of your expert trying to charge me for consulting 3 months ago and getting laughed off my ranch when he couldn't tell a heifer from a hay bale. The board president inserted the drive. Sure enough, there was Brent on video, nervously misidentifying a goat as a bull and nearly fainting when one of my chickens flew at him. The room exploded in laughter. Brent left in shame. Karen tried to defend him, claiming he was ahead of his time, but it was clear the show was over. The board voted, unanimously, to permanently remove Karen from her position. They even proposed a new policy. Any future HOA interaction with rural properties would require review by a county agricultural liaison. The final insult? They voted to send Karen the landscaping repair bill for every damaged lawn Diesel trampled, including her own. Back home, I stood by the pasture watching the sun dip low as Diesel munched lazily on a patch of clover. He glanced at me, then let out a long, satisfied snort. The fight wasn't over. Karen still had her house. She could still stir up trouble. But with the HOA turning against her and the law now clearly on my side, things had shifted. The bull had broken loose, sure, but now so had the truth. And next time Karen tried something, she wouldn't just be up against me. She'd be up against every neighbor Diesel had unknowingly avenged. Karen didn't take her removal from the HOA presidency quietly. For the next few days, she paced her front yard like a general plotting a comeback, watching my property through binoculars and muttering into her phone. Her house looked like a campaign headquarters gone sour, flyers ripped down, re-elect Karen's signs torn in half and stuffed in the garbage by the very neighbors who'd once supported her. Still, she couldn't help herself. She kept pushing. She couldn't accept that her carefully curated suburban reign had been toppled by a fence, a bull, and one very unbothered rancher who refused to fold under her suburban tyranny. One morning, I woke to find a basket on my porch. Inside was a stack of apology cards, each unsigned, with different handwriting, each more pitiful than the last. One said, "Sorry about the confusion." Another said, "It was just a misunderstanding." The third simply read, "Please don't bring the bull back." No return address. But I didn't need one. A faint whiff of lilac and control issues gave away the author, Karen. I chuckled, set the cards aside, and fed Diesel an extra scoop of pellets. That same afternoon, I was outside inspecting the new fence system I had installed. This wasn't just a fix, it was an upgrade. The new electric fence came with solar-powered backups, a voltage stabilizer, motion-triggered alerts, and even a weatherproof speaker that played a soft buzz every few minutes as an audio deterrent. But my favorite part was the new sign I'd hung by the front gate. A thick slab of cedar with deep-carved letters that read, "Private property, trespassers may encounter the bull." And just underneath it, I'd mounted a motion sensor that played a low-pitched moo when anyone got within 10 feet. The delivery guy nearly dropped his package laughing. Word of Diesel's bull-proof upgrades spread fast. By the end of the week, the local ranching co-op had come by to admire the system. A neighbor even asked if I'd install one for her pet alpacas. Meanwhile, Karen couldn't stand it. Every time she heard the hum of the fence, she'd peek through her curtains like it was a personal attack. She hated that Diesel still had the run of his field, that people now smiled when they saw him grazing, and most of all, that her attempt to control the narrative had backfired so completely she was now a meme. But then came the incident that tipped everything back into chaos, though this time, it wasn't exactly my fault. A week after the new system went live, I found Diesel standing near the back corner of the pasture, staring off into the HOA community with unusual interest. I followed his line of sight and saw it. The HOA maintenance crew had forgotten to close one of the rear community access gates. It wasn't on my property, but it opened right into a section of the walking trail that bordered my fence. That particular spot was weak terrain, soft after recent rain, and Diesel, being no fool, noticed it. He didn't charge. He didn't even walk fast. He just strolled, slow and methodical, through the gate like he owned the place. By the time I realized what was happening, he was already halfway across the trail, chewing on some decorative pampas grass like he'd been invited to brunch. The best part? He wasn't alone. 2 local kids had spotted him and were following him at a distance, giggling as Diesel sniffed at ornamental rocks and nudged a fancy solar lantern with his nose. I grabbed my override remote, whistled sharply, and called for him. Diesel paused, stared at me, and then looked back at the open yard he was now standing in, Karen's yard. Her sprinklers came on just as Diesel stepped onto the grass. Water arched through the air, glittering in the sun, and Diesel, apparently feeling playful, lowered his head and pawed at the wet soil. I didn't have time to call him again before he began rolling in it. My 2,000-pound bull, mid-roll, like a puppy in a puddle, completely destroying Karen's pristine backyard. Karen screamed. Not from the porch. Not from the sidewalk. From her upstairs window, where she had apparently been doing yoga. I turned and saw her frozen in tree pose, one leg lifted, arms shaking in horror as she witnessed Diesel's interpretive dance across her grass. She bolted downstairs. When she hit the patio, I saw she was wearing a lemon-patterned robe and fuzzy slippers. She shouted for him to leave. Diesel ignored her. She banged a watering can on the railing. Diesel grunted and rolled over again, this time flattening a lawn flamingo. That's when she snapped. She grabbed a garden rake, waved it over her head like a torch, and charged. Out! Out of my yard! She shrieked, stomping toward Diesel. He stood up slowly, shook himself off, and calmly walked toward her, not aggressive, just curious. Karen, mistaking his interest for a threat, backpedaled right into her koi pond. There was a splash, a yelp, and then silence. Diesel blinked. I blinked. Even the kids filming from across the trail blinked. I walked up, leash in hand, and whistled again. Diesel turned, sauntered back over like it was nothing, and allowed me to hook the lead onto his collar. We walked past the soaked remnants of Karen's patio, past the still sputtering sprinklers, and back through the open gate, which I promptly shut and zip-tied. I didn't say anything to Karen. Didn't need to. The look on her face, dripping, defeated, and covered in pond algae, said everything. Later that evening, I hosted a bull safety awareness barbecue on the edge of my property. It wasn't meant to be petty, but somehow it became the most attended event the neighborhood had seen in years. Folks brought chairs, desserts, and even t-shirts printed with Diesel's face and the words, "Horns up for safety." Kids posed with Diesel, under supervision, and someone brought a novelty cake shaped like a broken HOA flyer. Karen, obviously, wasn't invited, but she stood across the trail, arms folded, watching like a villain cut from the final scene of a soap opera. Toward the end of the night, the local sheriff dropped by to say hi. He chatted with the neighbors, gave Diesel a pat, and leaned in to tell me something. Apparently, Karen had tried to file a complaint earlier that day. He'd reviewed the footage and ruled it accidental trespass due to HOA negligence. He also mentioned they were considering charging Karen for the previous fence damage now that all the witness statements and digital evidence had been submitted in full. I thanked him, looked out at the crowd of happy neighbors, Diesel peacefully munching hay near the fire pit, and couldn't help but feel it. Not just relief, but satisfaction. After weeks of battles, tension, and ridiculous power plays, everything had flipped. The community, once silent, had rallied. Diesel had gone from pariah to party guest. And Karen? Well, she was still seething behind her curtains, likely drafting the next doomed petition. But this time, her influence was gone. The fear, the control, the ability to stir chaos, replaced by laughter, barbecue smoke, and the distant sound of a very satisfied bull snoring beneath the stars. A few weeks passed after the bull safety barbecue, and things around the neighborhood finally settled into something resembling peace. Diesel was back to his usual routine, grazing the pasture, occasionally mooing at clouds, and occasionally being serenaded by the neighborhood kids who now treated him like a four-legged superhero. The HOA, newly humbled and under more reasonable leadership, stopped sending passive-aggressive letters and started hosting actual community meetings with open questions and honest answers. No more surprise rule changes, no more Karen-inspired crackdowns. For the first time in months, life was quiet, predictable, normal. Then, without warning, a letter showed up in my mailbox. It wasn't typed. It wasn't in an envelope with official HOA markings. It was handwritten, on lined notebook paper, the kind you'd rip from a school binder. The handwriting was tight, almost anxious, like the pen was trying to outrun the writer's own shame. It started with 3 words that I'd never imagined Karen would write: "I was wrong." The rest of the letter wobbled between apology, explanation, and a bizarre kind of confession. She talked about feeling powerless after her divorce, about trying to rebuild her sense of identity through order and control. She said she thought the HOA would give her purpose, that managing people and policies would somehow fill the silence she'd been living with. And then she wrote the line that stuck with me more than anything else. "I didn't know how to stop until your bull literally rolled through my garden and made me." Attached to the letter was a gift card to the local farm supply store and a sticky note that said, "For Diesel. Buy him something fun." I sat on the porch holding that letter for a long time, watching the sun drop behind the hills. Diesel wandered over, nudged my boot, and flopped down beside me with a sigh that shook the floorboards. I didn't know if the letter was sincere, or if it was just guilt catching up to her, but I did know one thing. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I'd won. And Diesel had won. And sometimes that was enough. Still, Karen wasn't done writing her own ending. One morning I noticed a moving truck in front of her house. Workers carried out boxes, furniture, and the lemon-patterned robe she'd last worn when she landed in the koi pond. Word spread fast. Karen was selling the place and moving back closer to her family. Some said she needed a reset. Others said she'd been politely nudged out by the new HOA board, who'd suggested her energy might be better spent elsewhere. I didn't dance in the street or throw a party. I just watched from my front gate as she loaded the last box into the truck and lingered on the porch. She didn't wave, didn't say goodbye. But before she left, she looked across the trail toward my property. Diesel stood by the fence, his head raised, ears twitching, watching her like he somehow understood it was the last time he'd see her. She stared back for a moment, eyes locked with his, and then climbed into the passenger seat and disappeared down the road. Just like that, the storm had passed. The woman who had once cut my fence and unleashed chaos on our quiet corner of the world was gone, leaving behind trampled flowers, broken fences, and one very confused bull who seemed a little disappointed she didn't try one last dumb thing before leaving. With Karen gone, the neighborhood came alive in a way it hadn't in years. People stopped walking on eggshells. They threw porch parties, shared tools again, and finally stopped worrying if their birdbath was the wrong shade of beige. Diesel even got invited to the community's spring fair, where he sat behind a little picket fence while kids tossed beanbags and took selfies beside a sign that read "Diesel the Defender." Someone brought a guitar and sang a parody song called "Karen's Koi Pond Plunge." I didn't sing, but I did bring homemade beef jerky and a whole bucket of carrots for Diesel. He ate every last one. The HOA board added a new rule to their bylaws, ironically inspired by Karen herself. It said no homeowner or board member could interfere with agricultural operations on adjoining properties, especially livestock fencing. They even printed it in bold, laminated it, and presented it to me like a peace offering. I accepted it, along with a commemorative plaque they gave Diesel, which read, "For services rendered in defense of community sanity." It now hangs on the side of the barn, slightly crooked because Diesel keeps head-butting the wall near it whenever he's excited. As for me, I made one final addition to the front of the property. Right next to the reinforced bull gate, I posted a new wooden sign carved by a friend who ran a local lumber shop. It read, "Welcome to the ranch home of Diesel and the guy who let him loose." Below that, in smaller text, was a simple warning: "Do not touch the fence. Last person who did moved to another zip code." Every now and then, I still get emails or messages from strangers who saw the viral footage and want to visit or interview me. I turn most of them down. This wasn't supposed to be a spectacle, it was just life. Messy, ridiculous, unpredictable life. And while I'll never forget the day Diesel went full suburban commando, I also know that no video or meme or Reddit thread could ever fully capture the ridiculousness of those few weeks. You had to live it. You had to see a bull in a flower bed. You had to hear the crunch of a clipboard under a hoof. You had to feel the tension of a woman holding a garden rake like it was a sword. And yet, somehow, through all the shouting, chaos, and koi pond splashes, something good came out of it. The neighborhood changed. The people changed. Even I changed. I learned that sometimes the best way to deal with someone who wants to control everything is to let nature remind them they control nothing at all. Karen didn't just cut a fence, she opened a gate to something she couldn't contain. And in doing so, she gave the rest of us the freedom to stop pretending we liked being told what color our patio chairs had to be. Diesel still stands by that fence every morning, staring off into the distance like he's waiting for another opportunity to assert his dominance over suburban order. I like to think he knows what he did. I like to think he'd do it again if he had to. But for now, he's content. The fence hums quietly. The grass grows tall. And peace, real, stubborn, hard-won peace, settles over the ranch like the sunset behind his horns.